Cold Roads, a story of trust and survival in the American West. The winter air in Missouri was biting that morning when Samuel Hargrove made the final preparations for his journey. His small hometown was quiet, almost asleep under a thin layer of frost that glittered in the weak sunlight. The streets were empty except for the occasional sound of a horse-drawn cart creaking along the frozen dirt road. Samuel had always felt a restless pull toward the west, a place full of promise and danger. While his neighbors spoke of staying close to home, of safe farms and steady jobs, Samuel could not ignore the call of the wide-open land. He had heard stories of the West from travelers who passed through town, tales of gold, new opportunities, and the freedom to shape one's own life. But he also knew that the same land held hardships, cold nights, and people who could not always be trusted. He stood outside his small wooden house, looking at the pack he had prepared. It contained only the essentials: a few sets of warm clothes, a blanket, some dried meat and bread, a water flask, and his father's journal. The journal had been a gift from his father before he died, filled with sketches, notes, and advice about living wisely. Samuel ran his hand over the worn leather cover, feeling a strange mix of comfort and responsibility. It was not just a notebook. It was a guide, a memory of family, and a symbol of the journey he was about to take. The first steps along the frozen roads were difficult. Snow crunched underfoot, and the cold made his fingers stiff even inside thick gloves. Samuel had never traveled so far alone, and every step forward seemed heavier than the last. He passed the fields where he had played as a boy, now empty and covered in frost. His eyes lingered for a moment on the old church steeple, its bell tower casting long shadows across the snow. Memories of his childhood filled his mind. Days spent running through fields with friends, evenings by the fireplace with his family. But he knew he could not linger. The West called, and hesitation could cost him the chance to find a new life. After leaving the town behind, Samuel came upon the first of many challenges he would face. A narrow river crossed his path, mostly frozen, but with patches of thin ice and dark water. He tested the ice with a long stick, listening for the hollow cracks that warned of danger. He knew that a wrong step could plunge him into the icy water and possibly end his journey before it had even begun. Carefully, he inched across, 1 foot at a time, heart pounding in his chest. Each step was a test of patience and courage, and when he reached the other side, he allowed himself a small, relieved smile. This was only the beginning, and already he understood that survival would require constant attention and respect for the land. As he continued walking, Samuel began to notice signs of other travelers. Footprints in the snow, some fresh, some old, indicated that he was not the first to attempt this route. Some tracks were small, perhaps from a family traveling with children. Others were larger, rougher, and suggested men carrying heavy loads or riding horses. Samuel's mind raced with questions. Were these people friends or foes? Could he ask for help if needed, or would he be seen as a threat? The uncertainty made him cautious, yet also sharpened his senses. Every sound of cracking ice, every rustle of the wind through the bare trees felt amplified, as if the land itself were testing him. By late afternoon, the cold grew sharper. Samuel stopped to catch his breath and assess his progress. He found a small cluster of rocks near a frozen stream and decided to rest for a short while. Pulling out the dried meat from his pack, he chewed slowly, savoring the simple meal. The quiet of the wilderness was almost overwhelming, a stark contrast to the familiar hum of the town. Snow fell gently from the sky, dusting his shoulders and hair. He watched it for a moment, feeling a strange mixture of loneliness and awe. The land was beautiful, harsh, and indifferent, and he understood that it would not care about his plans or his dreams. He would have to fight for every step, every bit of progress, and every ounce of warmth. As night approached, Samuel faced another decision: where to sleep. The temperature would drop below freezing, and a poorly chosen shelter could mean frostbite, or worse. He spotted a small grove of trees that offered some protection from the wind and decided to make camp there. Gathering dry branches and fallen twigs, he built a small fire, the flames dancing and crackling in the cold air. The fire's warmth brought a sense of relief, but Samuel knew it would not last. He had to conserve his fuel, ration his food, and remain alert to dangers that might come with darkness. Even as the fire glowed, he felt the weight of isolation pressing in. The West was beautiful, yes, but it was also lonely, and trust was scarce. While preparing for the night, Samuel heard a faint sound on the edge of the trees. His heart jumped. It could have been a coyote, a deer, or even another traveler. But he could not take chances. Quietly, he picked up his rifle, the cold metal reassuring in his hands. He scanned the darkening landscape, eyes straining to see any movement. The figure that emerged from the shadows was a man, dressed in worn clothing, carrying a small bundle. Samuel froze, unsure of the man's intentions. The stranger stopped at the edge of the firelight, hesitating. Samuel's instincts told him to stay calm and observe. In moments like this, trust could not be given freely. It had to be earned. The man spoke, his voice rough but not threatening. "Evening," he said. "I mean no harm, just looking for a warm place to rest." Samuel studied him closely, noting the careful way he held himself and the alertness in his eyes. There was caution there, but also a glimmer of honesty. After a tense pause, Samuel nodded, lowering the rifle slightly. He gestured towards the fire. "Sit, but stay on your side of the flames." The man nodded and slowly settled near the warmth, keeping a respectful distance. That night, as the two shared stories and food, Samuel realized that survival was not only about enduring the cold or finding food. It was about reading people, understanding their motives, and choosing carefully whom to trust. Sleep came fitfully, the cold seeped through even his thick clothing, and the wind moaned through the trees. Samuel dreamed of endless snow, of frozen rivers and shadowy figures watching from the dark. When he woke, the sun had barely risen, casting a pale light over the white landscape. He packed his things quickly, leaving the stranger to continue his own path, a silent acknowledgement that both had survived the night through caution and observation. Samuel felt a mix of relief and resolve. He had survived the first day on the cold roads, but he knew that many more challenges awaited him. The West was not forgiving, and he would need every lesson learned, every ounce of courage to continue.
As he moved forward, Samuel's thoughts returned to his father's journal.
The notes about patience, observation, and careful judgment felt more relevant than ever. He wrote briefly in the journal, recording the first day's journey, the encounter with the stranger, and the lessons of trust. The act of writing calmed him, giving structure to the chaos of the wilderness. He understood that survival was not just physical, it was mental, a constant balance between fear, strategy, and hope. The landscape stretched ahead, a mixture of frozen rivers, dense forests, and distant hills. Samuel tightened the straps on his pack and adjusted his gloves. Every step would be hard, every night cold, and every encounter uncertain. But he felt a growing determination, a sense that the trials of the road were shaping him, teaching him skills and insights that no classroom or hometown could provide. The journey had begun, and with it a lesson that would remain with him for the rest of his life. That the West demanded resilience, courage, and careful judgment, and that trust, once earned, was more valuable than gold. With the first day behind him, Samuel pressed on, boots crunching in the snow, eyes alert to every movement, every sound. He walked through the quiet morning, aware of the dangers that lay ahead, yet inspired by the possibilities. The road was long, the cold unrelenting, but Samuel's heart carried a warmth born of purpose. He was no longer just a boy from Missouri. He was a traveler, a survivor, and a student of the vast wild land stretching endlessly before him. The morning after his first night on the frozen roads, Samuel Hargrove woke to a world painted in white. Snow covered every tree and hill, and the sun struggled to break through a heavy layer of clouds. The cold bit at his face, sharper than the day before, and his hands felt stiff despite thick gloves. He pulled his blanket tighter, savoring the fleeting warmth before he had to rise and continue the journey. The wilderness was beautiful, but it demanded vigilance. Every step forward was a test, and Samuel had learned that the first night was only the beginning. He adjusted his pack, checking supplies carefully. The dried meat and bread were running low, and he knew that food would not always be easy to find. Every decision mattered: how far to travel, where to rest, and when to conserve energy. Samuel's eyes scanned the snow for tracks, studying the direction of the wind and the signs of animals. Survival required both patience and observation, and the lessons from his father's journal guided him like a quiet voice in the wilderness. By mid-morning, Samuel noticed the faint outlines of a trail leading through a dense forest. The path appeared narrow and less traveled, likely used by hunters or traders. As he moved cautiously, he heard the crunch of snow underfoot echoing through the silent trees. The forest was both shelter and threat. It offered protection from the wind, but hid dangers that could appear without warning. Samuel kept his rifle ready, though he hoped to avoid conflict. He remembered the encounter with the stranger the day before and understood that caution and careful judgment were as important as courage. Hours into his journey, the cold became more punishing. Samuel's fingers and toes threatened to go numb, and he had to stop several times to rub them and keep his blood flowing. He searched for firewood along the trail, finding only sparse twigs and fallen branches buried under snow. Despite the hardship, he felt a sense of accomplishment with every small task completed. Building a fire, securing food, navigating the path. Each success was a reminder that even in a harsh, unforgiving world, preparation and determination could make the difference between life and death. Late in the afternoon, Samuel came across an abandoned cabin hidden among the trees. The structure was small and weathered, with patches of snow piled against the walls. Its door hung loosely on old hinges, and the roof sagged under the weight of ice. Curiosity mingled with caution as Samuel approached. He knew the cabin could offer temporary shelter from the cold, but he also recognized the risks. Someone might have lived there recently, and signs of their presence could mean either help or danger. Inside, the cabin was dark and musty. The smell of damp wood filled the small room, and snow had drifted in through cracks in the walls. Samuel's eyes adjusted to the dim light, and he saw remnants of a previous traveler, a small pile of food, a tin cup, and a notebook with scribbled notes. The notebook told the story of someone who had passed this way before him, notes about the weather, the dangers of the trail, and warnings about people they had met. Samuel carefully read through the pages, learning from another's experiences. He realized that knowledge shared, even indirectly, could save lives. He gathered what supplies were left, careful not to take too much, and set up a small fire in the cabin's hearth, grateful for the temporary warmth. While tending the fire, Samuel heard the distant sound of hoofbeats approaching. Instinctively, he moved closer to the doorway, peering into the falling snow. A man appeared, riding a tired horse bundled in a thick coat. The rider looked weary, and his horse struggled against the snow. Samuel considered whether to call out or stay hidden. Trust was never simple in the West, and the stranger's intentions were unknown. He decided to wait and observe. The man dismounted carefully, tying the horse to a nearby tree. He moved slowly toward the cabin, stopping a few feet away, as if unsure whether he was being watched. Samuel could see the fatigue etched into his face, the weariness in his movements. After a tense moment, he stepped outside, keeping his rifle lowered, but ready.
"Who are you?" he asked, his voice steady but cautious.
The stranger straightened, looking Samuel in the eye. "Name's Jeremiah," he said. "I'm just looking for some warmth and a place to rest. I mean no trouble." There was honesty in his tone, though Samuel could not ignore the possibility of deceit. He studied Jeremiah carefully, the way he carried himself, the careful respect in his movements. It was clear he was experienced in the wilderness, someone who had learned to survive. After a pause, Samuel nodded. "You can stay, but keep to your side of the fire." Jeremiah settled near the flames, removing his coat and revealing worn but sturdy clothing beneath. He shared a small bundle of dried food with Samuel, and in turn Samuel offered a portion of his own. They exchanged stories cautiously, each testing the other's character. Samuel learned that Jeremiah had been traveling for weeks, seeking work and safe passage through the harsh terrain. The older man's experience in the West was evident, and Samuel found himself listening closely, absorbing advice about staying safe, navigating difficult terrain, and recognizing danger. Night fell quickly in the forest, bringing with it a heavier cold. Samuel noticed how Jeremiah moved to tend the fire with practiced ease, ensuring it would not die out during the freezing night. The two men shared what little warmth they could, and Samuel felt a cautious sense of camaraderie. Despite the hardships, there was a lesson in human connection. Even in the most challenging circumstances, careful trust could provide comfort and strength. That night, as Samuel lay under his blanket, he thought about the road ahead. He reflected on the choices he had made, how he had observed the stranger before offering help, how he had used knowledge from the abandoned cabin to prepare for challenges, and how every small decision could determine survival. He realized that the West demanded constant attention, careful judgment, and a readiness to adapt. Strength alone would not be enough. Intelligence, patience, and discretion were equally important. The following morning, the temperature was even colder. Ice coated the trees, and every breath hung in the air like a white mist. Samuel and Jeremiah packed their belongings, ready to continue the journey together. There was an unspoken understanding between them. Trust was not given lightly, but once earned, it could form a bond strong enough to face the dangers ahead. They moved cautiously, aware that the wilderness was filled with both visible and hidden threats. Icy rivers, snow-covered cliffs, and people whose intentions could not always be discerned. As they traveled, Samuel began to notice signs of wildlife, deer tracks, the distant howl of a wolf, and birds moving cautiously through the trees. Each observation was a reminder of the harsh realities of the land. Food was scarce, and predators could appear unexpectedly. Samuel learned to move quietly, to assess every sound and shadow, and to respect the rhythms of the wilderness. Survival required awareness, and even small missteps could lead to disaster. By afternoon, the pair reached a clearing with a frozen stream running through it. The water beneath the ice was dark and fast-moving. Samuel paused, testing the ice with his staff before stepping carefully across. Jeremiah followed, guiding him with a steady hand and offering advice about the safest path. Samuel realized that the journey was teaching him more than just survival skills. It was shaping his character, strengthening his patience, and teaching him the value of careful observation. As night approached, they found a small overhang among the rocks, offering some protection from the wind. The two men built a fire and shared the last of their provisions. They spoke little, understanding that quiet reflection was just as important as conversation. Samuel wrote briefly in his journal, recording the day's journey, the lessons learned from the cabin and from Jeremiah, and his growing understanding of trust. Each word was a reminder that knowledge, observation, and careful decisions were essential to survival. That night, the wind howled through the rocks, carrying snow and cold into the small shelter. Samuel huddled near the fire, feeling the bite of the winter air even through layers of clothing. Yet he also felt a sense of resilience growing within him. He had survived another day on the cold roads, faced uncertainty with caution, and learned to trust someone carefully. The journey was far from over, but each step forward brought him closer to understanding the harsh yet fascinating world of the American West. As he drifted into a restless sleep, Samuel thought about the long trail ahead, the challenges yet to come, and the lessons he had already learned. Survival was not simply about enduring the cold or finding food. It was about careful choices, patience, observation, and the rare but invaluable gift of trust. He knew that tomorrow would bring new trials, but he also knew that he was not facing them alone. With Jeremiah by his side and the wisdom of experience guiding him, Samuel felt a cautious hope. The road was still long, the cold unrelenting, but he was learning to endure, to survive, and to grow stronger with each passing day. The morning was gray and still, with clouds hanging low over the snow-covered landscape. Samuel Hargrove awoke to the faint sound of wind whispering through the trees. The cold seemed sharper than the day before, and the frost had gathered thickly on the rocks and branches around their small shelter. He stirred slowly, grateful for the warmth of the fire they had kept burning overnight, and found Jeremiah already awake, tending the embers with careful precision. "Morning," Jeremiah said quietly, his voice calm despite the harsh surroundings. "The trail ahead is tricky today. We need to watch the ice near the creek and the slope past the ridge. One misstep, and it could be serious." Samuel nodded, feeling a mixture of respect and unease. Every word from Jeremiah carried experience. And Samuel understood that mistakes in these conditions could cost more than discomfort, they could cost lives. They packed their belongings carefully, making sure nothing was left behind. The snow crunched beneath their boots as they moved along the trail, their eyes scanning constantly for signs of danger. Samuel noticed how Jeremiah seemed to anticipate problems before they arose, shifting his weight to steady the footing on ice patches or pausing at the sound of distant movement. Samuel tried to match his careful observation, learning not only from experience but from watching someone who had spent years navigating these roads. By mid-morning, the pair reached a small settlement tucked between the hills, a scattering of wooden houses half buried in snow. Smoke rose from the chimneys, a sign of life and warmth. Samuel's heart lifted at the sight. After days of relentless cold and isolation, the sight of people was both comforting and nerve-wracking. He had learned that the frontier was not only a place of survival, but also of judgment. People were unpredictable. Blood. Some would offer help, others might take advantage of a traveler alone. They entered cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the snow. A few townspeople glanced up from their work, eyes wary but not hostile. Samuel noticed a family repairing a fence near the road, a man chopping firewood, and a woman carrying a bucket of water from a nearby well. Jeremiah led the way to the general store, a small building with a sign swinging slightly in the wind. Inside, the warmth of the room was immediate, and the smell of wood smoke mixed with a faint scent of dried herbs and food. Samuel felt a rare comfort, a reminder that human kindness existed even in the harshest conditions. While Jeremiah spoke briefly with the shopkeeper about supplies and directions, Samuel explored quietly. He noticed children playing near the shelves, careful not to knock anything down, and elderly men sitting by the fire, watching the world pass with calm wisdom. The scene reminded him of home, yet it was different. This town was rougher, quieter, and shaped by necessity more than comfort. Samuel realized that trust here was measured, earned by action rather than assumed. Every glance, every smile had meaning. As they left the store with some provisions, a commotion caught Samuel's attention. Down the road, a group of men had cornered a small boy near the frozen creek, their voices raised and angry. Samuel's instincts urged him to act, but he hesitated, remembering Jeremiah's advice. Even good intentions could lead to danger if not executed carefully. He watched the situation closely, noting the positions of the men, the movements of the boy, and possible escape routes. Jeremiah, noticing Samuel's tension, placed a hand on his shoulder. "Think first," he whispered. "Sometimes you can help without stepping directly into danger. Watch, learn, and choose your moment." Samuel nodded, focusing his attention on the boy, the men, and the frozen creek. He realized that trust was not just about people. Sometimes it was about knowing when to act and when to wait, observing carefully until the safest opportunity appeared. A sudden slip on the ice caused one of the men to stumble, and in that brief moment Samuel moved. He shouted, not aggressively but loudly enough to draw attention, and pointed toward a safer path for the boy to escape. The boy hesitated, then ran, following Samuel's direction, while the men recovered from their slip too slowly to interfere. It was a small act, subtle and careful, yet it made all the difference. The boy reached safety, and Samuel felt a surge of cautious relief. He realized that even minor interventions, when measured and thoughtful, could save lives without inviting unnecessary danger. The encounter left Samuel thoughtful as they continued along the trail. The West was a place of constant tests, and not all challenges were physical. Some required moral judgment, careful planning, and awareness of human behavior. He had acted to help without putting himself or Jeremiah in immediate danger. A balance he understood now was essential for survival. He also saw that trust was not blind. It was a tool to be wielded carefully, earned through observation and experience. As the day wore on, the temperature dropped again. Snow fell steadily, covering the tracks they had left and making the trail more difficult to navigate. Visibility became limited, and every step forward required caution. Samuel relied on Jeremiah's experience, following his lead across tricky patches of ice and around hidden cliffs. He noted how Jeremiah paused at every uncertain step, tested the footing, and made minor adjustments that could prevent disaster. It was a lesson in patience, careful planning, and respect for the land. By late afternoon, they reached a dense forest where the snow lay heavy on the branches. The weight of the snow caused some branches to hang low, creating obstacles along the trail. Samuel moved slowly, brushing snow from branches and scanning the ground for hazards hidden beneath the white blanket. He realized that the environment itself was a constant adversary. The cold, the snow, and the hidden dangers required vigilance at every moment. Survival was not just about strength or courage. It was about attention, patience, and adaptability. They found a small clearing suitable for setting up camp for the night. The firewood was sparse, and the wind cut sharply through the trees. But Samuel and Jeremiah worked together, gathering branches and building a fire that could withstand the gusts. The task required cooperation, careful planning, and trust in each other's abilities. Samuel felt a sense of accomplishment. He understood that survival often depended not only on individual skill, but also on the ability to work with others when the situation demanded it. That evening, as the fire burned, Jeremiah shared stories from his past journeys through the West. He spoke of harsh winters, unexpected blizzards, and encounters with both helpful and untrustworthy people. Samuel listened closely, absorbing every detail. He asked questions, learning not only about the land but about human nature, the ways people could be cautious, kind, or deceptive depending on circumstances. Each story was a lesson, reinforcing what Samuel had already begun to understand. Trust had to be measured, and observation was as valuable as action. Night fell, and the cold deepened. Samuel wrapped himself tightly in his blanket, feeling the fire's warmth seep into his bones. He reflected on the day's events, the settlement, the boy at the creek, and the lessons learned from Jeremiah. Each experience had strengthened his understanding of the world he had entered. He realized that the West was not simply a place of adventure or opportunity. It was a place of constant challenges, where survival required balance between caution and courage, patience and action. As he drifted toward sleep, Samuel wrote briefly in his journal, recording the events of the day, the lessons of trust, and his observations of human behavior. Writing helped him process the journey, giving structure to his thoughts and reinforcing the lessons he had learned. He knew the trail ahead would bring more tests, more decisions, and more opportunities to apply what he had discovered about careful judgment and measured trust. By the early hours of the next morning, Samuel awoke to a heavier snowfall, covering the clearing in white. The fire had burned low, and he quickly rekindled it with the remaining wood. Jeremiah was already awake, adjusting the pack and checking their supplies. Together, they prepared to continue the journey, aware that the path would grow more difficult with the deepening winter. Samuel's confidence had grown, not from recklessness, but from understanding the careful balance between observation, caution, and decisive action. As they moved forward through the snow, Samuel noticed tracks, some animal, some human, leading off the main trail. He pointed them out to Jeremiah, who nodded thoughtfully. They followed cautiously, curious but alert. The tracks led to another small settlement, abandoned and quiet, evidence of people who had once sought shelter but moved on, or perhaps left in haste. Samuel studied the remnants carefully, noting clues about the former inhabitants' routines, the supplies they had left, and signs of struggle or sudden departure. Each observation reinforced his understanding that survival required both awareness of the environment and careful interpretation of human behavior. By evening, the duo found a suitable place to rest, a small hollow beneath a cluster of trees offering some protection from the wind. The fire was small but steady, casting shadows on the snow around them. Samuel and Jeremiah shared the remaining provisions and spoke quietly, their words measured and deliberate. The cold had intensified, and the journey was taking a toll, but Samuel felt a growing resilience. He understood that each day on the trail brought lessons not just in survival, but in character, patience, and the careful weighing of trust. As night fell, Samuel reflected on the past days. The West was harsh, the cold unrelenting, and the dangers constant. Yet he felt a sense of growth and understanding, a realization that he was learning how to navigate both the physical challenges of the wilderness and the subtler challenges of human nature. Survival required vigilance, judgment, and the ability to act when necessary. Trust, earned and measured carefully, could make the difference between success and disaster. With that thought, Samuel drifted into sleep, the snow falling softly around their small camp. He knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but he also knew he was learning to endure, to observe, and to act with wisdom. The lessons of the day would stay with him, guiding him through the cold roads of the American West and preparing him for the challenges yet to come. The morning air was sharper than ever, and Samuel Hargrove awoke to find the world around him coated in a thick layer of frost. The trees bowed under the weight of snow, and the cold wind sliced through the forest like a blade. His body ached from the long days of travel, his fingers stiff and his toes numb despite his thick boots. Yet there was a strange comfort in the rhythm of survival. The steady work of packing, walking, and finding shelter, the careful observation of the land, and the reliance on learned skills. Each day made Samuel stronger, more aware, and more resilient. Jeremiah was already awake, tending the fire with careful precision. His movements were slow but deliberate, a reflection of years spent surviving in the West. Samuel watched him quietly, absorbing every gesture, every decision. The older man's experience was a guide, teaching Samuel lessons that could not be found in books or in town. "The mountain pass ahead is tricky," Jeremiah said, his voice calm but serious. "The snow can hide loose rocks, and the wind makes footing uncertain. We'll need all our focus." Samuel nodded, tightening the straps on his pack and preparing himself for what lay ahead. They moved forward cautiously, the snow crunching beneath their boots and the wind whipping around them. Every step was deliberate, every branch pushed aside with care. The trail wound upward, climbing toward a series of ridges that promised both challenge and exposure. Samuel could feel the strain in his legs, the ache in his back, but he pressed on, understanding that the only way forward was forward. Survival demanded persistence, and he was learning to endure the harsh rhythm of the wilderness. As they climbed higher, the temperature dropped further. The wind carried snow in sharp, stinging gusts that made it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. Samuel held his rifle close, not expecting trouble from people, but wary of the dangers of the environment. Snow could conceal cliffs, ice could betray footing, and a sudden gust could send a traveler tumbling. Every movement required balance, attention, and calm determination. It was exhausting. But Samuel found a strange satisfaction in the effort, in knowing that each careful step increased his chances of survival. By midday, they reached a narrow ledge overlooking a frozen valley. The sight was breathtaking. Miles of white landscape stretching into the distance, frozen rivers winding like silver ribbons, and the pale sun glinting off the ice. Samuel paused to catch his breath and let his eyes take in the beauty of the land. It was a harsh beauty, cold and unforgiving, but also inspiring. The wilderness was not only a test of endurance, it was a teacher, offering lessons in patience, observation, and humility. Jeremiah spoke softly, breaking the silence. "This is the kind of place that reminds you how small you are. Respect it, or it will humble you quickly." Samuel nodded, feeling the weight of the words. He understood that arrogance had no place on these roads. The West demanded respect, careful attention, and the ability to act wisely when danger appeared. He felt a growing bond with Jeremiah, built not only on trust but on shared experience and mutual dependence. The afternoon brought new challenges. A sudden blizzard swept across the ridge, reducing visibility to almost nothing. Snow stung their faces and filled their eyes, and the trail beneath them became treacherous. Samuel's heart raced as he followed Jeremiah's careful lead, testing the footing with each step. The wind threatened to knock them off balance, and the cold penetrated even the thick layers of clothing. Yet they pressed on, driven by determination and the understanding that stopping too long in the storm could be just as dangerous as continuing. After hours of slow, careful travel, they found a small hollow in the rocks, offering minimal protection from the storm. Samuel shivered as he gathered snow-laden branches to build a fire, his hands stiff and slow. Jeremiah assisted, their movements synchronized through unspoken communication. When the fire finally burned steadily, a faint warmth reached them, though the cold still clung to their clothes and skin. They sat close to the fire, sharing what little food remained, and spoke quietly to conserve energy and preserve their focus. During the long night, Samuel reflected on the journey so far. The challenges had become more severe, testing not only physical endurance, but emotional resilience. He had faced isolation, danger, and uncertainty, and he had learned that survival depended on careful planning, observation, and judgment. Trust once again proved to be a crucial factor. His growing reliance on Jeremiah was not blind. It was earned through experience, mutual respect, and shared risk. Samuel realized that partnerships, even temporary ones, could be essential in a land that tested every traveler relentlessly. The following morning the storm had subsided, leaving a quiet white landscape in its wake. The trail was hidden beneath fresh snow, making navigation difficult. Samuel consulted his father's journal, noting advice about using natural landmarks and listening for sounds in the environment. Jeremiah moved ahead carefully, testing each step, and Samuel followed, learning to interpret the subtle signs of hidden danger beneath the snow. Every step was deliberate, every choice critical. Survival was no longer simply about reaching the destination. It was about making it through each moment safely. By midday, Samuel's feet and hands were numb, despite layers of clothing and frequent breaks. The mountain pass loomed ahead, a narrow trail flanked by steep cliffs and treacherous slopes. The wind howled, carrying ice and snow, and visibility was limited. Jeremiah turned to Samuel. "We move slowly, one step at a time. Watch the ice, test the rocks, and do not rush." Samuel nodded, his heart pounding, but his mind focused. He understood that fear could be managed, but carelessness could be fatal. They began the slow climb, moving in deliberate coordination. Samuel tested each step before placing his full weight, listening for cracking ice or loose stones. Jeremiah guided him around dangerous spots, pointing out subtle signs that could indicate instability. The journey was exhausting, both physically and mentally, but Samuel felt a sense of accomplishment with every careful step. Each success reinforced his growing understanding of the wilderness. It was unforgiving, but those who respected it and paid attention could endure. As the sun began to lower in the sky, they reached a small plateau overlooking the valley below. The view was breathtaking, but Samuel could not linger. The cold was intensifying, and night would soon bring harsher temperatures. They searched for a safe place to rest, eventually finding a small cluster of trees providing minimal shelter from the wind. Samuel gathered what firewood he could, and Jeremiah helped, their movements coordinated by trust and necessity. Together, they built a fire that would offer some warmth through the night. That evening, as they sat near the fire, Jeremiah shared more stories of his travels. He spoke of winters harsher than this one, of people he had met along the road, and of moments when careful judgment had saved his life. Samuel listened closely, asking questions and absorbing every detail. He realized that survival was not just about strength or courage. It was about learning from experience, observing carefully, and acting wisely. Each story carried a lesson, a reminder that patience, attention, and discernment were as important as any physical skill. The fire crackled as night fell, the shadows stretching across the snow-covered ground. Samuel wrapped himself tightly in his blanket, feeling both fatigue and satisfaction. The challenges of the day had tested him in every way, physically, mentally, and emotionally, but he had endured. The mountain pass had been treacherous, but careful observation, patience, and reliance on Jeremiah had brought them through safely. Samuel understood that the West was not a place of instant reward. It was a place of constant testing, teaching lessons slowly and sometimes painfully. As he drifted into sleep, Samuel reflected on the growth he felt within himself. The journey had hardened him against fear, strengthened his body against the cold, and sharpened his mind for careful observation. But more than that, he had learned the value of partnership, trust, and measured risk. Jeremiah's guidance had shown him that survival was rarely a solo endeavor, and that even the harshest roads could be navigated successfully with patience, knowledge, and careful judgment. By morning, the snow had stopped falling, leaving a bright, crisp landscape under the pale winter sun. The trail ahead was still difficult, but Samuel felt a quiet confidence. He knew the journey was far from over, yet each step strengthened his resolve and his skills. Survival in the West demanded resilience, attention, and the ability to act with wisdom, and Samuel had learned that he possessed all three. With Jeremiah by his side and the lessons of the trail guiding him, he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, understanding that endurance, careful judgment, and trust were the keys to navigating the cold, unforgiving roads of the American West. The morning air was calm and clear, a stark contrast to the storms and blizzards Samuel Hargrove had endured in the past weeks. Snow blanketed the landscape in crisp white, sparkling in the early sunlight. The cold was still sharp, but there was a quiet beauty to the world around him. Samuel stretched, feeling the stiffness in his muscles from the long, exhausting journey, and realized how far he had come. Each step, each trial, each decision had taught him something new about survival, trust, and the strength of human spirit. Jeremiah was already awake, tending a small fire to melt snow for water. He had become a constant guide, companion, and mentor to Samuel, someone whose experience complemented Samuel's growing skill and determination. Together, they had faced blizzards, frozen rivers, dangerous cliffs, and the uncertainties of meeting strangers on the road. Through it all, Samuel had learned that survival was as much about judgment and patience as it was about courage or strength. Jeremiah glanced up and smiled quietly.
The town is just ahead. Not far now.
Samuel felt a surge of relief, but also a bittersweet feeling. The journey had changed him, and he knew that leaving the wilderness behind would mark the end of one chapter and the start of another. As they descended the last slope toward the small frontier town, Samuel noticed signs of life immediately. Smoke curling from chimneys, horses tied to posts outside wooden buildings, and the faint sound of people working. The town seemed modest but organized, a safe haven compared to the harsh and unpredictable roads they had traveled. Samuel's heart lifted at the sight. After weeks of cold, hunger, and uncertainty, there was warmth, shelter, and the possibility of rest. But he also knew that the lessons of the journey would not vanish with the town's walls. He would need to remain cautious and observant even among people. They entered the town carefully, boots crunching on the snow-covered street. A few townspeople glanced their way, curious but not hostile. Children peered from behind doors, their eyes wide with wonder at the sight of travelers, fresh from the wilderness. Samuel felt a quiet sense of belonging, though he knew it had been earned not by his arrival but by the long trail he had crossed, the challenges he had endured, and the careful choices he had made along the way. He understood now that trust was something built slowly, through actions and observation, not freely given to strangers. Jeremiah led him to the local inn, a small wooden building with smoke rising from the chimney and the smell of fresh bread and firewood inside. They were welcomed by the innkeeper, a kind-faced man who offered warmth and a hot meal without hesitation. Samuel felt the comfort of the inn immediately, the heat seeping into his bones, the simple food nourishing him after days of meager rations. As he ate, he reflected on the journey. The blizzards, the frozen rivers, the treacherous mountain passes, and the lessons learned along the way. Survival had demanded careful thought, patience, and courage, but more importantly, it had taught him the value of trust and companionship. After the meal, Samuel found a quiet corner and took out his father's journal. He began to write, recording the events of the journey in detail, the encounters with strangers, the lessons learned from the abandoned cabin, the snow-covered trails, and the moments of danger that had tested both his skill and his judgment. He wrote about Jeremiah, whose guidance had been invaluable, and about the strength he had discovered within himself. Writing provided a sense of closure, a way to reflect on the past weeks, and to preserve the lessons that would guide him in the future. In the following days, Samuel explored the town, learning about its people and routines. He saw families working together to maintain their homes, merchants conducting business, and neighbors helping one another through the cold winter. He recognized a pattern familiar from his journey. Those who survived and thrived were careful observers, patient workers, and people who built trust through actions rather than words. Samuel began to feel a connection to this community, understanding that his journey was not only about survival in the wilderness, but also about finding a place in a society that valued both independence and cooperation. Jeremiah stayed nearby, helping Samuel navigate both the town and the lessons it offered. He spoke of the importance of balance, hard work and caution, patience and courage, trust earned carefully but offered generously when deserved. Samuel listened closely, realizing that these principles had guided him through the wilderness and would continue to guide him in this new chapter of life. The bond between them had grown strong, built on shared trials and mutual respect, and Samuel knew that their experiences together had changed him in ways he could not yet fully measure. One afternoon, Samuel wandered to the edge of town, looking out over the frozen river that ran through the valley. He thought about the long roads behind him, the challenges faced and the small victories that had carried him forward. The land was harsh, indifferent, and sometimes frightening, but it had also taught him resilience, observation, patience, and the careful use of trust. He understood that the wilderness had shaped not only his body but his mind and spirit, preparing him for a life that required both courage and wisdom. As the sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow over the snow, Samuel returned to the inn. Jeremiah was already there, preparing supplies for the next stage of their journey or perhaps just for the day ahead. Samuel felt a sense of gratitude for the older man, whose guidance had been steady, patient, and often life-saving. He realized that survival was rarely a solo endeavor. Companionship, shared knowledge, and careful cooperation were often the difference between life and death. That evening they sat near the fire reflecting on their journey. Samuel spoke of his hopes for the future, of building a life in the town, learning skills, and finding work. Jeremiah nodded, offering advice and encouragement, reminding Samuel that endurance and observation would always serve him well. Samuel felt a quiet confidence, knowing that the challenges of the West had prepared him for almost anything, and that the lessons of trust and careful judgment would remain with him forever. In the following weeks, Samuel began to build a life in the town. He helped with daily tasks, learned new skills, and gradually earned the trust of the townspeople. Each small success reinforced the lessons learned on the cold roads, the importance of patience, observation, careful action, and measured trust. He found satisfaction in contributing to the community, knowing that survival and growth required both individual effort and cooperation with others. One morning, Samuel stood on a small hill just outside town, looking out over the valley below. The snow-covered landscape stretched endlessly, silent and still under the pale sunlight. He thought about the long journey, the dangers faced, the lessons learned, and the friendships forged. The wilderness had been harsh, testing him at every turn, but it had also taught him resilience, careful judgment, and the value of trust. He understood that survival was only part of life's journey. Learning to navigate relationships, challenges, and opportunities with wisdom was equally important. Samuel opened his father's journal and added a final note, reflecting on the experiences that had shaped him. He wrote about the importance of careful observation, patience, courage, and measured trust. He wrote about Jeremiah, whose guidance had been invaluable, and about the small but meaningful lessons found in both the wilderness and the town. Writing gave him a sense of closure, a way to honor the journey and preserve its lessons for the future. As winter gradually gave way to early signs of spring, Samuel felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. The cold roads had tested him, but he had endured. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and isolation, and had learned to navigate each challenge with care and thoughtfulness. Trust, patience, courage, and observation had become not just tools for survival, but principles for life. Samuel knew that the road ahead would still bring challenges, but he felt ready, confident, and prepared. The story of Samuel Hargrove ended not with dramatic heroics or sudden fortune, but with a quiet understanding of the world, his own strength, and the value of trust earned through experience. He had crossed the cold roads of the American West and emerged stronger, wiser, and more aware of both the harshness and the beauty of life. The lessons of the journey would remain with him forever, guiding him in the town, in the wilderness, and wherever life might lead. As he watched the sun dip below the distant hills, Samuel felt a warmth that came not only from the fire at the inn, but from the knowledge that he had survived, learned, and grown. The roads had been long, the winter harsh, and the challenges many, but he had endured. The West had tested him, but it had also taught him about resilience, trust, judgment, and the quiet strength of the human spirit. Samuel turned back toward the town, ready to continue life with the lessons of the cold roads forever in his heart, knowing that survival had been only the first step in a lifetime of learning and growth.